Pout Pout Fish Lucky Leprechaun. Every St. Patrick's Day, Mr. Fish dresses up in a tall hat and whiskers and carries a pot of gold, but this year his pot is empty. "What a wonderful leprechaun costume," said Miss Shimmer. "But my golden treasure is missing," Mr. Fish says. "Leprechauns always carry a pot of gold." "We'll find it," says his friend. "Wearing green on St. Patrick's Day should bring us all good luck." Mrs. Squid spreads the word. "We're looking for the missing treasure," she says. "Missing treasure?" echoes Mrs. Clam. "Oh my!" Besides his treasure, Mr. Fish has also lost his holiday cheer. "We must find the missing gold," declares Mr. 8. Up and down, over and under, the creatures follow one another through the sea. As they parade after the missing treasure, a worried Pout Pout Fish leads the way. Underneath the Emerald Isle, the excited searchers scatter in every direction. "If you were a golden treasure, where would you hide?" Mr. Fish wonders. "In this big dark, said Mr. Lantern. "Let's see what we can find." Mr. Lantern and nervous Mr. Fish swim down, 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 where they discover a wild array of creatures, but not Mr. Fish's special treasure. Mr. Fish is glad to leave the depths behind. "Let's visit my cousins, the oysters," suggests Miss Clam. "They all know about hiding treasures." No luck. Lounging on a sandy bed near the shamrock, the oysters explain that they only know about hiding pearls inside their shells. Mr. Fish's smile goes farther upside down. "How about the shipwreck?" said Mr. 8. In the hold of a sunken pirate ship, they find a chest of golden coins. "Is this the treasure you are looking for?" asks Miss Clam. "No," says Mr. Fish. "I'm going home," says the disappointed searcher, heading toward Rainbow Reef. As Mr. Fish watches the small fish swim away, he has an idea. "I think I know where my treasure is." He darts off and the others follow. At the end of Rainbow Reef, in a hidden hollow, Mr. Fish finds what he is seeking, a school of shimmering yellow butterfly fish. "We found the gold at the end of the rainbow," Mr. 8 declares. "We thought it would be fun to play hide and seek," said the mischievous golden fish, as they swirl back to Mr. Fish's pot, completing his costume. It's a happy parade home, now that Mr. Fish is reunited with his little friends. "What a lucky day," says a smiling Mr. Fish. "Happy St. Patrick's Day to one and all." The Luckiest Leprechaun. Mackenzie O. Shamrock, at your service, but you can call me Mac. I'm a leprechaun, and I don't care if you believe in me or not. Get too close and I'll show you who's real with my hammer. I may be small, but we leprechauns are not to be trifled with. There, now that's settled. Pull up a toadstool or a chair if you're too big, and I'll tell you my story. I was born beneath a fairy hill back when time was new. Ever since, I've been making shoes for the fairy folk and guarding my gold from greedy people. Treasure hunters have to get up pretty early in the morning to get the best of Mackenzie O. Shamrock. And since leprechauns work at night and sleep during the day, I'm up much earlier than most. No, they haven't made the human yet. Who could outsmart me? Then people found out a new way to boil my potatoes. They stopped believing in leprechauns. They believed in all sorts of nonsense, but the little man making shoes beneath with their very own hedge couldn't possibly exist. It got so only children and oddballs like Professor Chester believed in me. I didn't need people anyway. I had a nice home under a tree in a quiet park. As long as I had my gold and my work, this leprechaun was content. Every night I cobbled for the fairies. Since all the little things that do is dance and lose their shoes, business was steady. Every morning I'd pack away my tools and curl up in my cozy bed. And that's just what I was doing one fine morning when I heard a horrible scratching overhead. Dirt poured down from my favorite armchair as a pair of giant paws burst through the ceiling. My thimble collection clattered to the floor. I grabbed my hammer and ran outside to see who was wrecking my home. I expected a goblin or some other horrible monster. I found a shaggy red dog bearing a stinky soup bone. "Hello," she barked. "Who are you?" "I'm Mackenzie O. Shamrock," I shouted. "And you've got some nerve destroying my home. You'll not be stealing my gold, you mangy mortal, so just take your bone and go." I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was living here, the dog said. Is that your gold? It's very pretty. Go! Shoo! Get lost, I shouted. The dog didn't budge. Shaking her head, she said, I feel terrible. I've got to make this up to you. I'll fix your house. I'll be your guard dog. I don't need a guard, I said. But you must need a friend. Everyone needs friends, the dog said. My name is Lucky. What's yours? That made me even madder. Mackenzie O'Shamrock, I yelled. Oh, that's right. You did tell me, Lucky replied. But that's so much to remember. May I just call you Mac? I hope we'll be friends. Everything's more fun when you do it together, don't you think? Just the other day, Lucky would have gone on like that for hours, but I told her to go away and stay away. Apparently, stay was the only command the dumb dog knew. From then on, wherever I went, there was Lucky. She was slobbering over me when I woke up at dusk. She was on my heels while I gathered cobwebs for thread. Lucky even tailed me when I made my deliveries to the fairies. And she always had a cheerful word or 100. It drove me nuts. The dog was even happy when it rained. Rain is where the rainbows come from, Lucky said. I love rainbows, don't you? Could chase them? I could chase them all day. Why don't you go chase them so I can get some quiet around here? I growled. After a while, Lucky learned not to talk so much, especially when I first woke up in the evening. I won't say we became friends, but she got to be slightly less annoying. Speaking of annoying, remember that human I mentioned a while back, the oddball who believed in leprechauns? That's right, Professor Chester. Well, he started snooping around my park. He's after my gold, I cried. Maybe he just wants to be friends, Lucky suggested. I snorted. Humans want only one thing from a leprechaun, gold. But he won't get the best of Mackenzie O'Shamrock. Professor Chester was getting dangerously close. He even found a fairy shoe. Don't worry, Mac, said Lucky. You've got your guard dog, remember? I won't let anything happen to your gold. I took no comfort in the mutt's ravings. I watched Professor Chester poring over his books of leprechaun lore. If only I could prove their existence, he muttered. I shuddered. Maybe he'll just go away, Lucky said. I thought about packing up, but I liked my cozy life under the tree. Besides, business was good, and it's not so easy to find a park filled with fairies. Then one day, while I was sleeping, the professor found my tree. He was about to capture me and would have gotten my gold for sure when... Woof, woof, woof! Lucky came charging out of the woods. The professor cried, Help! Monster, help! He dropped his map and ran off screaming. I thought I was having a nightmare. I rolled over with a groan and fell right back to sleep. Professor Chester just kept running until he wore out the soles of his shoes. Turned out the professor was scared of dogs. That evening I woke up feeling something was wrong. For one thing, the dumb dog wasn't licking my face. Suddenly, with a jerk, I remembered the nightmare. I checked for my gold in all my secret hiding places, but it was gone, and so was Lucky. I called Lucky's name until my voice was hoarse, but there was no answer. I felt as if I had lost my shadow and my friend. Then it hit me. My worst fear had come true. The dog wasn't as silly as she seemed. Lucky had duped me into trusting her, and as soon as I let my guard down, she'd run off with my gold. I, Mackenzie O'Shamrock, the smartest leprechaun of them all, had finally been tricked out of my treasure. I searched the park for hours, but there was no sign of my gold or Lucky. I told myself the dog had skipped off with my treasure, but part of me didn't believe it. One minute I was furious, the next I was worried. What if that stupid pooch had chased a rainbow into traffic or gotten herself taken to the pound? I couldn't even keep my mind off my missing gold. By dawn, I was the saddest leprechaun in the world. After centuries of being suspicious, I'd finally opened my heart and pow! The first friend I'd made had stolen my gold. The sun came up and I wiped away the tear. Then a voice behind me said, Why are you crying? I turned and saw Lucky and my gold. Where were you? I yelled. I was worried sick. Lucky licked my face. You do care. I knew we'd be friends. I wiped the dog slobber from my face and grumbled. I was worried about my gold. Lucky explained that she'd seen Professor Chester nosing around near my tree. After she'd chased him away, she hid my treasure in the tool shed, just to make sure it was safe. Then, worn out from the excitement, she'd fallen asleep. Did you really spend all night looking for me? Lucky asked. And the gold? I added hastily. But the damage was done. The dog knew I cared, and she wouldn't stop wagging her tail over it. So there's my story. Leprechaun gets gold. Leprechaun gets dog. Leprechaun loses gold. Leprechaun admits that a loyal friend is worth more than gold, as long as the friend doesn't slobber too much. Now, if that isn't a tale worth telling upon a toadstool, I'm sure I don't know what is. The Leprechaun's Gold. Long ago, before even your great-great-grandfather was born, there lived in a small village in Ireland a man known as Old Pat. Old Pat was a harpist, and a good one at that. Many a wedding was made the merrier by Old Pat's harp. In the same village dwelled young Tom. Tom had learned his own harp playing from Pat's teaching. But now Tom thought himself a better harpist than Old Pat. He was much given to boasting and bragging, and charging the villagers great amounts of silver for his skills. Old Pat was humble and willing to play his music for free for those he knew had not the means to pay. "Foolish old man," scoffed young Tom. "What use is a gift if not to make you rich?" Old Pat replied, "I am rich in friends, and that is enough." It is to be supposed that life would have continued along its way for Old Pat and young Tom had they not seen the announcement. By order of the king, harping contest to choose the finest harpist in Ireland at the royal palace. All may enter. "To be known as the best harpist in Ireland would be an honor indeed," said Old Pat. "Don't waste your time, old man," sneered Tom. "It's a young man like myself they'll be wanting." But Pat shook his head and gathered his few meager possessions for the journey. "Aha!" thought young Tom. "If we travel together, he's sure to offer me a bite of his food. That would save me a penny or two." And so it was on this night, the two sat together by their fire of twigs. They were footsore and weary from walking the many miles toward the royal palace. As he listened to Pat practicing for the contest, a sudden thought flashed through young Tom's mind. I could lose to this ridiculous old man. So, as Pat turned his head for a second, the wicked boy quickly snapped a string on Pat's harp and pushed his own spare string deep inside his bag. "I'm sorry for your trouble," he said to Old Pat, "but I have no string to lend you, for I might need it myself." Old Pat sighed. He had no money to buy a new string. The harping contest was good as lost. Then suddenly, through the darkness, came a cry, "Help!" The two men shivered, for they knew tales of tricks played on poor travelers by villain leprechauns. "Surely 'tis the little people that's after us," whispered young Tom. But as the voice rose to a wail, Old Pat's kindness of heart proved stronger than his fear of leprechaun tricks. "We must find out who's in trouble," he cried to Tom. "Not I," declared young Tom. "I'll have nothing to do with it. I'll not take the risk of missing the contest." He turned his back to the voice and covered his ears. On shaking legs, Old Pat walked toward the sound of the voice. In a clearing, he saw a tiny man with his foot down on a rabbit hole. "Help me, sir," cried the little man. "I took off my shoes to rest my feet, and a rabbit has taken hold of my big toe. Help me." From deep in the burrow came the shrill laugh of the rabbit. "Let go, you rogue," the little man yelled down the hole. "I'll have you for dinner, you pesky bag of flea-ridden fur." "I'll soon fix that scoundrel," thought Old Pat. He bent down and barked piercingly as a fox might in the night. The rabbit let out a scream of fright, and out popped the little man's toe. "Thank you," cried the leprechaun, for a leprechaun he was. "Come," said Pat, trying not to laugh, for a funnier sight he thought never to see. "I've not much to offer, but what I have you're welcome to share." Old Pat led the leprechaun back to the fire. "I see your fellow traveler has up and gone," said the leprechaun. "A brave fellow indeed he proved to be, but I thank you kindly for your help. I'd like to repay you." "I'll be needing no payment," answered Old Pat. He picked up his harp and began to play a soft tune to soothe the little man. "You play well," said the leprechaun, "but I'm thinking your harp is not in a good way." "I have a broken string," answered Old Pat sadly. "I'm on my way to the harping contest at the royal palace, but I'll not win now. I have no money to buy a new string." "Ah," declared the leprechaun sharply, "so it's the gold you'll be wanting." "No, indeed," cried Old Pat, mightily alarmed. He knew terrible things happened to those who searched for crocks of leprechaun gold. Ah, but yes, I think it's so, answered the leprechaun firmly. Suddenly, old Pat's eyes would not stop from closing. With a sigh, he fell asleep. The leprechaun blew a silvery note on his whistle. Out of the forest came a band of little men, each carrying a bag. He wants the gold, said the leprechaun as loud as he told the tale of old Pat. You know what to do. The little men nodded solemnly as they clicked open their bags. When old Pat awakened the next morning, he looked around in fright, but the leprechaun was gone. It's a lucky escape I've had, cried old Pat, as he picked up his harp case and set off for the royal palace. As old Pat reached the courtyard, young Tom took the stage, looking mightily pleased and confident. He began to play a sweet tune, but as if bewitched, the strings on his harp began to break. One by one, they twanged and twitched and twirled in the air until all lay dangling. Young Tom gazed at his harp in horror, but then he knew. Leprechauns, he muttered, as he hung his head and shuffled from the stage. Now it was old Pat's turn. With sadness in his heart, the old man reached for his harp. Then his eyes widened, for there inside his bag lay a glittering golden harp. The leprechaun's gold, gasped old Pat. He lifted the golden harp and began to play. He played the merriest music ever heard, so wonderful that the wind itself stopped to listen. A wild tune it was, which filled the people's hearts with joy and their lips with laughter. As the magic seized their feet, the people began to dance. Soon the courtyard was filled with dancing, singing, laughing crowd. The other harpists knew now that this was Pat's day and danced along with the people. Even young Tom, who had learned a hard lesson, found generosity growing in his heart. When the final note faded away, the king rose from his throne and beckoned to Pat. "Old man," said the king, "the prize is yours. Never have I heard such music. From now on you will play always for me and my people. You are awarded the title Royal Harpist of Ireland." From the nearby forest came the twinkling sound of a little leprechaun laughing. A fine St. Patrick's Day. For as far back as anyone could remember, the towns of Tralee and Trala had been rivals. Every year on St. Patrick's Day, they held a contest to see which town could decorate best for the holiday. And though the people of Tralee tried their hardest, they never won. The prize, a golden trophy in the shape of a shamrock, was always awarded to Trala. Each year, when the winner was announced by the official county judge, the people of Tralee sighed and said, "Next year we'll win, to be sure." The people of Trala laughed at them. "No, you won't. You have always lost, and you always will," they said. One year, the mayor of Tralee rang the bell in the town square, calling all the townspeople to gather. When everyone was there, he said, "Little Fiona Riley, though she's but a wee lass of 6, has come up with a fine idea for this year's contest. We'll win, to be sure, but only if everyone agrees to it." Little Fiona's plan was to paint everything in the town bright green. "'Tis a fine idea," said Emily O'Fallon. "But will all of our homes be painted green?" "Yes," said the mayor. "'Tis surely a fine idea," said Reverend Flattery. "But will even the churches be green?" "Yes." "'Tis a most excellent idea," said Brogan O'Neill, the school principal. "But will the school be green?" "Yes," said the mayor. "Everything, right down to the wee doghouses, will be painted green." "Except for the mailboxes," said Mr. Root, the postmaster. "They are government property." "And the fire hydrants," said Captain Blazes, the fire chief. "They must stay yellow to be seen." A hush came over the crowd as the townspeople thought about the plan. When the mayor asked how many wanted to paint the town green, everyone shouted and cheered and whooped and hollered and said, "'Tis a fine idea. This year we'll win, to be sure." They agreed that little Fiona Riley's name should be engraved on that trophy. The people of the Tralee bought painters' hats and coveralls. They bought brushes and rollers. They rummaged through basements and sheds for ladders and buckets. And little Fiona was allowed to choose the shade of green they would use: Emerald Isle, Limerick lime, or Galloway green. Fiona chose Limerick lime. Mr. and Mrs. Kelly, who owned the hardware store, ordered hundreds and hundreds of gallons of Limerick lime paint. Meanwhile, the people of Tra-La were planning too. They decided to cut shamrocks from green cardboard, sprinkle them with glitter, and hang them from every branch of every tree in town. On the day before St. Patrick's Day, as everyone in Tralee and Tra-La were busy working on decorations, a little man on a large horse came galloping across the meadow. He wore red trousers, a brown leather apron, and boots decorated with gold bells. His beard came down to his stomach. Pointed ears stuck out beneath the brim of his hat. His horse had long satin ribbons braided into its mane. The man turned toward Tra-La and stopped at Mrs. Donegal's house at the edge of town. He pounded on the front door. Mrs. Donegal, scissors in hand, answered. Frantically, the little man asked, "Begging your pardon, can you help me? I was leading my cows across the river, and sure and begorra, they are stuck in the mud." "You picked the wrong day to ask for help," said Mrs. Donegal sharply. "I'm cutting shamrocks." She shut the door in his face. The stranger hurried to the next house. When Mr. O'Leary answered his door, the little man asked, "Begging your pardon, can you help me? I was leading my cows across the river, and sure and begorra, they are stuck in the mud." "Away with you," said Mr. O'Leary. "I'm busy cutting string for our shamrocks." "The river is cold. My cows won't last much longer, to be sure," said the stranger. But Mr. O'Leary had shut the door and gone back to measuring his lengths of string. At the third house, the little man asked again, "Begging your pardon, can you help me? I was leading my cows across the river, and sure and begorra, they are stuck in the mud." The McLeans, their hands covered with glitter and glue, looked annoyed. "Don't you know what day this is?" Mrs. McLean asked. "We're busy getting ready to beat Tralee in the contest." At every house, the stranger was turned away. Finally, he had crossed the field into the Tralee. At the first house he came upon, he asked, "Begging your pardon, can you help me? I was leading my cows across the river, and sure and begorra, they are stuck in the mud." Mary Kate Driscoll was on her ladder, paintbrush in hand. Her coveralls were splattered with Limerick lime paint. Her face was smudged with Limerick lime blotches. She climbed down and looked at the little man. She looked at up at her house. She scratched her head. "Follow me," Mary Kate said. She ran to the town square and rang the bell until all the townspeople came, wearing coveralls and painters' hats. The little man yelled out to the crowd, "Begging your pardon, can you help me? I was leading my cows across the river, and sure and begorra, they are stuck in the mud." "But what about our painting?" someone shouted. "What about the contest?" called another voice. "This is the year we'll win, for to be sure." "What about the trophy?" a third person called out. Little Fiona Riley was sitting atop her father's shoulders, listening. She looked down at the people all splattered with Limerick lime paint. She thought about the golden trophy. She thought about having her name engraved on it. Finally, she called out in a voice loud and clear, "But what about the cows? We need to help the cows." A hush came over the crowd as everyone considered what little Fiona had said. "'Tis a fine idea," said Emily O'Fallon. "'Tis surely a fine idea," said Reverend Flattery. "'Tis a most excellent idea," said Brogan O'Neill. When the mayor took a vote of how many people wanted to help the stranger, every hand went up. The crowd shouted and cheered and whooped and hollered. All the people of Tralee headed for the river, the children, the old folks, and the families with babies. They went in wagons, on bicycles, and on foot. As they crossed the meadow, they heard the sound of cowbells. And when they reached the river, sure and begorra, there were the little man's cows stuck in the mud. Everyone pushed and pulled and tugged. One by one, the cows were freed from the mud at the bottom of the river. The sun had long set by the time the people of Tralee got back to their homes and fell into bed, tired and wet. "Ah, well, next year we'll win, to be sure," said the mayor to his wife as he sank into a deep, snoring sleep. The following morning, the people of Tralee woke to the sound of the bell ringing in the town square. They ran outside in their pajamas and nightgowns, and in the case of old Mr. Murphy, bright red long underwear. What they saw was so incredible they could barely believe their eyes. Every inch of Tralee was green, sparkling, shimmering, glimmering, and glorious green, from the wee doghouses to the tall spire of the church, except for the mailboxes being government property, and the fire hydrants, which remained yellow so they could be seen. The people of Tralee shouted and cheered and whooped and hollered, "This year we'll win, to be sure!" And they did. When the official county judge rode through the two towns, he declared Tralee to be the winner and handed the mayor the prize. The trophy case in the town hall was no longer empty. It now held one golden shamrock, which would soon be engraved with little Fiona's name. As the St. Patrick's Day supper of the lamb and boiled potatoes was set out in the town hall, the mayor asked some of the townspeople to find the stranger and invite him to the party. They rode across the meadow, beyond the river, and as far as the peat bog, but they could not find the little man or his cows. All they found was a single cowbell. It was made of shining gold. And though the people of Tralee passed the golden cowbell from hand to hand and talked throughout supper about the glimmering, glorious green miracle, no one could account for what had happened. All they could remember was the tinkling sound of the little man's boots and the beautiful ribbons in his horse's mane. Little Fiona Riley remembered that when the man thanked her at the river, he said, "You have already won." As the sun began to sink behind the hills, the town slowly faded back into its real colors. "'Twas a fine St. Patrick's Day," the mayor said. He took the golden shamrock from the trophy case and put it into little Fiona Riley's hands. Everyone shouted and cheered and whooped and hollered. The following year, when it came time to plan how to win the contest, little Fiona Riley thought she was but a wee lass of 7, had an idea. When the idea was put to a vote, everyone shouted and cheered and whooped and hollered. That St. Patrick's Day and every year afterward, though they would take the shamrock and the golden cowbell out of the trophy case and polish them, the people of Tralee would no longer compete with Tra-La to win another trophy. They would decorate their town and share a meal of lamb and boiled potatoes simply for the joy of it. 'Twas a fine idea, to be sure.